My goal was to connect the houses and the Menil with some transition in spatial and physical scale. Because the scale must change drastically to smoothly join the Menil building to the houses adjacent to the site, the separation of my museum program into a primary and secondary building seemed appropriate to match that of the two scales. The consequent building sizes balanced the impact of the Menil Museum on the neighborhood house and vice versa. I attempted to match the different spatial phenomena of each side of the site via several elements that create a structured spatial transition between the two. The first area matches the primary scale of the Menil lawn. Because visitors approach the site from the Menil, and because the most access occurs via the northern half of the area, I decided to concentrate museum activities on the north half of the site. The gallery runs east-west and is the largest visible part of the museum. The building itself begins along the structural line carried across from the Menil porch. A visitor moving along the sidewalk from the Menil should recognize no change in the scale of the space. I used several objects in the next area to begin to shrink the scale as the visitor moves closer toward the neighborhood houses. The first is the placement of the gathering area for 50 visitors. The sculpture sits at the focal point of the gathering space immediately off of Sewell Ross Street. I use the existing trees along the sidewalk as well as slight earthen embankments to frame the sculpture. The placement of the sculpture should divert the attention from the size and depth of my museum building to that of the size and depth of the gathering space, which recedes in comparison. The second object to aid the transition is the walkway that separates my two museum buildings. Bypassing the sculpture to enter the museum places the visitor along a walkway that bisects the site. It serves as a thoroughfare for visitors desiring to visit the Cy Twomley half of the site, including some of the traffic from the Rothko and Byzantine chapels. It essentially serves the purpose of a small-scale street, distinct enough for museum activities to make both sides of the street seem individual despite the close proximity. As a visitor approaches the smallest scale, the secondary north-south segment of the building stops just short of the sidewalk, continuing the facade line of the two houses next to the property. I shrunk the height of the building to match the average height of the gutter line. The space therefore scales down to add to the creation of a horizontal space to connect the rest of the neighborhood houses. The end of the transition occurs when a visitor moves in front of the bungalow house next to the site. My location of the buildings, as well as confining museum activities to the north half of the site, achieved some preservation of the park on the south half. Although potential exists for development of the parcels directly south of the two bungalow houses and east of my site, at the moment they continue the park space that my building defines. The spatial phenomena I accounted for along Sewell Ross Street does not exist along Bernard Street, since no structure shares the museum block on the south side.